Hi, this is the Extra Podcast. Jeff Bucknam speaking here. This is one of the Nobodies podcasts, at least in that series. Not because we're interviewing nobodies, but from the world's eyes, they kind of are.
I have a servant.
You're already jumping in. This is. Yeah. I'm here with my friend Kevin, who's one of the elders of our church. Kevin, can you introduce yourself? Full name?
Kevin Peters.
That's your full name. You don't have a middle name.
Kevin Neil Peters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that a family name, Neil Peters?
Yeah, it's coming from Cornelius, actually. But my father, well, of course, wanted to name me Cornelius, but my mother vetoed that one, and we settled with Neil.
Oh,
Mennonite background.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, you are an elder of our church. You are a young man.
I am.
How old are you?
43.
43 years young. You are not the youngest elder. We've spoken to our youngest elder already, Jason Wall, but you are a young one.
I am, yeah.
So tell me, I just want to know a little bit about your story, your background, all that sort of stuff.
Sure. How far do you want me to go back?
Are you from this area?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Abbotsford. Spent the majority of my life, other than a couple of significant chunks.
Really?
Yes.
So when you say born and raised in Abbotsford, like the MSA Hospital.
MSA Hospital. In fact,
it doesn't exist anymore.
Doesn't exist anymore. There were, I think, my son was born in the new hospital, but there were like 4 generations of Peters is born in that MSA Hospital.
Did you grow up in the church?
Yes.
Like in Northview?
No, not Northview. I grew up attending various Mennonite churches, mostly...
Mennonite or Mennonite Brethren?
Mennonite Brethren, mostly Central. I spent a lot of my childhood at Central Heights for a number of reasons we won't get into at this point, but I also spent a number of time in various Pentecostal churches in this city. We kind of alternated from Mennonite to Pentecostal to Mennonite to Pentecostal, so I have a very interesting...
How often would you change churches?
Probably every 2 years.
Wow. What?
There's reasons behind it, but I won't get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've had lots of experience with the churches of Abbotsford.
Yeah, I have.
That's great. And you are, you went to university? No, you did not. You did.
No, I skipped I went to community college. So my grade 12 year of high school, my family moved up north.
What high school did you attend?
Well, I was going to Abbey Junior, Abbey Senior.
Okay.
I should have technically graduated from Abbey Senior had we maintained the family course, but the family ended up moving up to Fort St. John, British Columbia. I followed, I didn't go with them actually right away, but I ended up following them up there eventually. And I ended up in Fort St. John for my grade 12 year, so I graduated from North Peace Secondary School. And then I worked for a year up there, and then I went to a community college in Dawson Creek, which is just south of Fort St. John, and I got my aircraft maintenance engineering diploma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't there a TV show about Dawson Creek?
No.
I'm pretty sure there is.
No, it was Dawson's Creek.
Same thing?
No, it's not the same thing.
I don't want to wait.
That takes place down in South Carolina or somewhere, I think.
So it's not in northern BC.
No, it's not northern BC.
Okay. This is a different town then.
Completely different world, yep.
Okay.
Fort
St. John.
Fort St. John?
What do they do in Fort St. John?
Oil.
Oil.
Oil, natural gas, yeah. It's a resource-based.
But you didn't want to stay there.
Oh, no, I never wanted to go there in the first place, so I definitely didn't want to stay there. But I ended up in the north for essentially 4 years. But as soon as I graduated from college, I moved back down south, came back down to Abbotsford.
Okay.
And then
did you meet your spouse here?
Yes, at Northview. So I came back down to Abbotsford after I graduated.
What year are we talking here? We're in the early 90s.
We're talking 94.
Yeah.
And I started attending Northview by 95, 6, and then I met my wife at a small group Bible study.
Really, not at the Roaring 20s.
Well, it was a Bible study that came out of the Roaring 20s. It was one of the community groups that was a Roaring 20s community group. So that's kind of what drew me to the church.
What was the Roaring 20s, for those who don't know?
The Roaring 20s was the young adult ministry based, the college age group. So you're in your 20s, that's where the Roaring 20s come from. And it was the thing in Abbotsford at the time. It was attracting all sorts of college people to the church because it was just a big crowd, and often college age people get attracted to crowds. So
they do. Well, so other genders are there.
Yeah, that's right. So it was a big thing that was happening in Abbotsford. I kind of got pulled in from the fringe, but I quickly realized missions has been my passion all since way back from high school. So I knew coming out of high school, and that's the reason I went into college to get my maintenance diploma, was because I was going to go on the mission field as a maintenance mechanic. With aviation.
Well,
at the time, I wasn't sure who I was going to serve with, but I was going to serve with someone, and the whole driving force was I felt the burden to see the gospel proclaimed in places where it wasn't proclaimed, and either because a place was cut off from the gospel in the sense that it was a closed country, they wouldn't allow typical missionaries in which case I would have a trade. Aviation's a worldwide occupation, so there are planes and helicopters everywhere, even in closed countries. So I thought I could either use it as a tool to get into a closed country, or the gospel isn't being proclaimed because people are geographically isolated. And with aviation, we have access to get evangelists and church planters and church development people into geographically isolated areas. So that's kind of what drew me to the occupation. There were a number of options on the mission field that could use those skills.
Yeah.
So I went and got my diploma. I moved back down to Abbotsford, got kind of drawn to the Roaring Twenties crowd because some of my old high school friends were drawn to that crowd, and they kind of invited me along. But that's not what kept me at Northview. What kept me at Northview was it was a church that also had a passion for missions and seeing the gospel proclaimed. And at the time, Frank Martins was the missions pastor, and I shortly after I started attending Northview, I had some conversations with him, and I recognized that this was a church that I thought would be a good fit for me, and I wanted to be a part of a church that would support me long term. I was going over long term, so I wanted a church that could stand behind me and support me for as many years as I'd go over, and Northview fit the bill.
So you met what's your wife's name?
Erin Peters.
Erin.
Yep.
That was her name before you married her?
No, her name was Erin Hebert.
Oh, okay. So this is Mennonite blue blood marriage.
Yes, yeah.
Wow. The angels in heaven rejoiced.
There was lots of singing, yes.
So you have 3 kids?
We have 3 kids currently.
Yeah. Oldest is?
15.
Youngest?
And then 13. And then the youngest is 7.
Okay. Good. And they're having a good, you're enjoying living, and you're an aircraft mechanic now.
Yep. Yes.
Or a helicopter mechanic now.
Yes.
But between now and your schooling and training and stuff, you actually did go.
I ended up overseas
on the mission field, and you went to?
We went to Madagascar. And no, it's nothing like the cartoon.
Do you know Emperor Julian?
Yeah, and he likes to move it, but no, I never
What do you
saw.
mean it's nothing like that? Of course it is.
I never saw a singing lemur.
Exactly what it's like.
I saw dancing lemur, sure, because they do dance, but I never saw a singing lemur.
Okay. So Madagascar, why Madagascar?
Why Madagascar? Well, it's okay. So
where is Madagascar? A lot of people are listening.
Sure.
That sounds like a movie, but other than that.
No, Madagascar is actually the 4th largest island in the world, and it's located off of the southeast coast of Africa. Technically, it's an African nation. It belongs geographically to the African continent. However, it is a ways off of the continent, and the people themselves, the majority of them actually won't refer to themselves as Africans necessarily.
Really?
Yeah, they're Indian Ocean people. They're island people. So they will kind of they'll kind of take ownership of the African heritage if it suits them, but they would probably not tend to want to necessarily be called Africans or be part of Africa in general.
So what's it like living? So you moved there.
So
I want to know why this particular
country
country though.
Okay, so this particular country, well, it's the agency. We ended up signing on with a mission agency called Heli Mission. They operate helicopters in a variety of different geographically isolated locations around the world.
Why would you operate a helicopter in a geographically isolated part of the world?
Well, because people need to hear the gospel.
Okay, so the helicopter comes and they magically hear it.
No, they don't magically hear it. Okay, so how it plays out is. We know that people are saved by responding to the gospel message that has to be proclaimed by someone. There are people groups around the world, especially so when we get to Heli Mission, there are people groups that are geographically isolated from any other people group, and so they kind of exist inside of their own microcosmic world for the most part until someone comes in from the outside and accesses those groups. Now, we as Christians believe that this gospel needs to be proclaimed to all people groups, and that there is no hope for salvation outside of the proclamation of the gospel. So it's up to us as a church, and I'm not necessarily saying Western church, but it's up to us as a church who have received the gospel. It's up to us to be part of the proclamation of that gospel. God has entrusted that gospel to us that we might go forth and proclaim it. And there are people groups that have not had the opportunity to hear the gospel proclaimed to them. And so it's up to us as a church to get into these areas. Now, some of these areas are very difficult to get into because geographically, they're the mountain ranges, the rivers. In Madagascar, there's no road infrastructure because it's an undeveloped country. There isn't much there for other countries to pillage from in some ways, and so the infrastructure has never been developed. They're isolated. They're extraordinarily isolated, being an island off of the coast that doesn't have much going for it that other countries would be interested in. It's left it to some extent forgotten by the rest of the world. Now, we as a church know that it exists. We know that people on that island need to hear the gospel proclaimed to them. So we're looking at ways how can we get people, evangelists, people into these areas to proclaim the gospel. A helicopter can overcome a lot of geographical boundaries. There's just no way around it. Now, the helicopters aren't necessarily the ideal tool. We're going to get into some pretty in-depth conversation here at the moment, but helicopters are not necessarily the ideal missionary tool because a helicopter, by its very nature, comes with a lot of interesting baggage when it comes to missions.
Yeah, I bet so.
It does.
I mean, the people who are seeing it arrive end up reading, "You are an angel from the sky."
Yes. And when they don't have, when literally they've never, some of these people groups have never seen machinery of any form. When you come flying out of the air in one of these things, how they have no
godlike.
They have no idea how to frame this inside of what they understand the world to be and to incorporate. So so you came in a flying chicken is often a metal chicken came out of the sky. And we don't, as much as we want them to respond to the gospel, we want them to be responding to the gospel. We don't want them to be responding to what they...
Yeah, to the fact that you
came flying out of the sky.
You're a god. It's like that passage in Acts where they think that Paul and Barnabas are Zeus and Hermes, and no matter how much they try to convince them, they're like, "No, you are, you are."
Yeah, it's not ideal. However, we also recognize that it's not ideal to leave people without access to the gospel. So we do our best to minimize the downside of the vehicles we're using and the methodology we're using to proclaim the gospel. We recognize that, and so we're actively trying to counter some of the negative effects of what we're doing as much as possible.
So you got to Madagascar. You were there for 7 years.
We were in country for 6 years. Yeah, okay. We were serving with Heli Mission for 7, but we were actually in country for 6.
Okay, what's that like? First day you arrived, you get off the airplane.
Yeah, and I hadn't been outside of North America. Like I hadn't even been to Mexico. So I wasn't necessarily ready for the
your
type
ideal missionary.
Yes. I wasn't necessarily ready for what I was going to encounter. I will say, though, that I before we went to Madagascar, I worked for essentially 5-6 years in the helicopter industry, getting the relevant experience I needed to carry out the duties I was going to do in Madagascar. And a lot of my those years were spent fixing helicopters inside of some very remote places in Canada. So I was used to isolation. I was also used to working inside and around reserves, and there's actually a lot of similarity between some of the reserve communities, isolated reserve communities in Canada, and some of the isolated places in Africa or wherever else you end up. So I can't say that I was completely without some kind of context with how to deal with where I found myself, but it was a shock. There's no doubt about it. What
was the hardest part? Initially, what was the hardest part initially?
The hardest, well, I mean, first of all, you're instantly thrown up against some language barriers.
What language do they speak?
So they speak Malagasy, which is just a local, and then even inside of Malagasy, it's one of these countries where, because people are isolated and it's such a large country, there's multiple dialects, like hundreds of Malagasy dialects, and you can take a person from the north, put them in the south, and they won't be able to necessarily understand each other. So
it's like going to Newfoundland.
Yeah. Wycliffe,
sorry.
That's right. Wycliffe is very active in Madagascar just because there are so many language groups there also. But anyways, that's a diversion. So you're up against language. Malagasy is the official language. The actual kind of common language and bureaucratic language inside of the capital city, which is where we lived and based out of, that's French, because Madagascar was a French colony. They got independence.
Did you speak? You didn't speak French prior to getting there.
I had conversational. I had the benefit of our great Canadian educational system that gives us,
but not French immersion.
Quebecois, hello and how are you? But I wasn't French immersion. However, all three of our children are French immersion, and they can speak far more fluent French than I can. And I was working beside all of these other mission groups and missionaries and expat communities, and I was astounded to see that everyone else working in this country could speak 3, 4, 5 languages, and I felt foolish as a Canadian. I could only speak English, really,
and barely, yeah. Right?
So
sorry,
yeah. So I picked up. My French improved while I was there, but I never really did get great. I didn't to carry out the duties I was doing. I didn't necessarily have to talk with anyone, so I could get away with English for the most part.
So you went there. The language barriers there.
Was poverty.
Where did you? It was the
Extreme
poverty. That was probably hard for you to. I mean, you have ideas about it in your mind, and the poverty that we see in North America certainly is shocking, but not.
No, extreme poverty. You come in as a missionary, and your sole purpose for being there is to help people. I mean, that's what you've come to do. Ideally, to help people by proclaiming the gospel and having them respond and having the gospel transform their lives is the ideal. But you want necessarily out of gospel proclamation and the other things we're doing. We cared for people as people, and people have all sorts of needs, physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs, financial needs. And so you try to seek to help them as best you can in a variety of ways you can, and just the staggering amount of need that's it's.
How do you make this? I mean, when you're in that situation, Kevin, you see so much need. Do you find it Did you find it difficult to know which ones to address? Because people will come to your door.
Oh, all the time.
Especially for being the white folks coming in and having things that I imagine that they didn't. You were able to afford things that locals were probably not able to afford. And so how do you make decisions about that? How are you going to help? Who you're not going to help? You must have passed some people by.
Sure. Oh, yeah. You have to pass a lot of people by. You have to pass most everyone by, because that's the reality of it. The what I'll say is, first of all, I don't know that there isn't any real easy answer to that question, and each person will approach that in different ways, and will have different responses. My wife and I both had very different mechanisms to some extent for coping and rationalizing and working our way through these decisions. We often consulted with, especially if we wanted to involve ourselves in a person's life in order to help them, we would do that together. So we would have conversations about how best we can do to help people. Of course, one of the things I was actually surprised to kind of be confronted with was that, first of all, people want your help, but they don't necessarily want it the way you want to give it to them. They don't necessarily want the help that you offer them. And sometimes you want to help people, you see the need, you attempt to help them, only to realize that they don't actually even want your help. And that's so you have all sorts of each issue, each situation comes with a context to it that has multiple facets to it, complications to it. And just like life, all of our lives, no situation is really simple to understand or grasp from the outside. Once you start asking questions, taking a look at what the actual problem is, you realize that there's all sorts of underlying issues and background problems that need to be addressed to actually help someone. So helping people is actually very rarely easy, simple, or quick.
There's a book out called When Helping Hurts that's pretty helpful, I found.
Yes, very.
Just interacting with these questions.
Yeah, if you really want to take a look at how you can involve yourself or how to approach helping people's needs, that is an excellent resource to start with. I'll tell one quick story about kind of one of the situations that still is so engraved on both Aaron and my mind when we're asked questions about helping people and how do we handle this. So we were driving through the city and the roads are very narrow. They were designed essentially when vehicles weren't really around, so they were designed for ox carts and eventually cars, but for the longest time there were hardly any cars in the city, so they could get away with very narrow roads. The capital city's in a mountain, so the roads are very windy. They kind of go up the hill and down the hill. So now that there are more vehicles, there's still not a ton, not compared to what we see around here, but there are more vehicles and the roads are often clogged. And so traveling through the city is usually a time-consuming exercise and absolute frustration. But one day we were driving through the city. We had recently purchased a basket of fresh plums. And we had this basket of plums on the front seat between. Erin was with me. She was in the passenger side. I'm driving the vehicle. We have this basket of plums in between us. And we come through a particular part of the city and neighborhood where there's just there's just a whole raft of kids playing on the side of the road and kind of mingling in and amongst the traffic. We're going quite slowly. One of the children come up to the window. You can see the child is malnourished. He's not overly healthy, and he's a young boy, hungry, obviously hungry. And so Erin takes one of the plums from the basket and she holds it out to this child so that the child accepts the plum. Another child comes. Within probably 30 seconds, we were driving a small pickup truck. We had kids in the back bed of the truck. We had people climbing onto the truck, trying to pull the basket out from inside the truck. We had the first original child we had given the plum to is getting beat up on the corner because a bigger kid is trying to take the plum from him. We started a riot to some extent by trying to give a young boy a plum.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. That's difficult to come to terms with, to come to grips with, and eventually you just so then how do you respond? You roll up the windows, you drive away, and you're crying. And what do we never give a plum to? How do we deal?
Yeah, and it's very difficult to sort through.
It's heart-wrenching.
The implications, and it reminds me of years ago. I was in Guatemala City in the Guatemala City dump, and I gave a little kid a hat one of the days, and he put it under his shirt. Yeah, it was a hat that I had. He just kind of, as soon as he got it, he was so happy, and then he put it under his shirt and he walked away. The next day, I showed up to do some work for the ministry that was there, and I walked around the corner, and there was about a 17-year-old boy with a hat on his head, sent that hat, and through an interpreter, I said, "Where'd you get the hat?" And he said, "I just found it." Later that day, I found the little boy I gave it to, who had a black eye. Yeah. And that's essentially what happens is that you know, he ends up getting injured by me giving him a hat. Yeah. So it creates all sorts of problems. You have conversations with people who live in those situations, but the book is very helpful. I do have a question though. So you're there for 7 years dealing with this kind of poverty, or 6 years dealing with this kind of poverty. You come back here. Yep. And people have driving nice cars on big wide roads. And did you think that everybody here was a hateful materialist who, like, how do you deal with that move back here?
Yeah, it's to some extent you just kind of shelve it. To be honest with you, like I recognize that we live in a different culture, in a different place in the world, and I recognized relatively quickly that I can hold it against people, or I can even hold it against myself when I see the car I drive and the house I live in, and I don't know how do you deal with that? You eventually just have to accept that as a nation, as a culture, as a place and time, and in this world, we're blessed in ways that other parts of the world aren't, and it shouldn't be that way. It definitely shouldn't be that we don't recognize.
Well, the inequity shouldn't necessarily be the case, but
No.
there's this tension that you have.
Sure, there is.
On the one hand, you recognize how nice it is to have the things that you do. On the other hand, this kind of kinship that you have with brothers and sisters in Christ around the world who don't have it, and a desire for there to be some level of equity and an involvement.
Yeah.
Going on missions and being involved in situations like you were involved, I would assume, makes you the kind of person that when you get back here, you do acclimate to this area, but I would imagine it makes you more aware of the needs that exist out there, not just, I mean, spiritually, absolutely, but also materially.
Yeah. You
I share more, I hope.
Sure. Yeah. I tried so first of all, I consciously tried very hard to resist the urge to judge others. They haven't necessarily seen and experienced the things I experienced, which then shapes the way I see our possessions and the way I view them and the way I pursue or don't pursue them, and I don't pursue them. I also then take upon myself a little bit of responsibility for some education, bringing some awareness to the people around me. One of the bigger things that I had to come to terms with and deal with was, yes, a recognition that there is an inequality question that floats around in every relationship and place we're in, and I had to deal with that. But the first thing I had to deal with that I really struggled with was just that that whole experience had changed me so much as a person on a whole number of levels, not just the way I viewed possessions and material things, but just how I viewed what was important and valuable in life and health and all sorts of aspects of living. That whole experience had transformed me to the extent that I wasn't anywhere near the same person I was when I left. And I come back to my hometown, to my old friends and the places I lived and grew up in. And yes, other people had changed and the city had changed while we were gone, but not at the same
rate
proportion that I had changed.
At least not the same rate in that particular area.
Yeah. And so I really struggled with, okay, so if I want to try to educate my friends, my co-workers, my fellow brothers and sisters inside the church, the first thing I had to overcome was just how do I even talk to people who, whenever they look at me, they have this look in their eyes like they know me because they knew who I was. They didn't necessarily know who I am now. And I struggled with how do I, first of all, I have to get to this place where they can understand who I am now, and then maybe they can hear what I'm trying to say, and recognize that there's a whole raft of things behind what I'm saying. And it's not just a theoretical proposition about inequality in the world. It's this is what I've seen, this is what I've experienced, and we need to adjust the way we see the world. How do I bring that across to people?
What do you? As we finish here, what do you miss most about the mission field, about Madagascar in particular?
Yeah, I miss I miss the sense of dedicated purpose. One of the things that we're always up against here in North America is our culture is so affluent in so many ways, and it's very consumer driven. It's very individualistically driven. It's narcissistic. And so you're always, I find myself as a person always pushing back against the culture I'm surrounded by, and what everyone tells me I think I should be pursuing or valuing, the importance that the culture places on certain things that I don't agree in and don't want to follow, and yet the culture is always pushing me into places I don't want to go. And there is, of course, a selfish side of me, a part of me that would like to go to those places. So I find myself battling some of my sinful nature that I'd rather not have to deal with. And frankly, in Madagascar, because it's a poor nation and you're removed from a lot of that. You don't have to fight the same battles as you do here. So in some ways,
you miss You missed
it's
that.
simpler. It's easier to be a Christian, and it's easy like to live.
Yeah.
To live the Christian focused life of what's really valuable to me. What is my real purpose in life? I'm not distracted by nearly what I'm distracted.
I think
with
that some people will find that a bit shocking, what you just said, but a really great thing to reiterate, that it is difficult to be a Christian in the West these days, and with the money and all these sorts, especially if you take seriously the Bible's the Bible's warnings regarding some of the stuff that we get really infatuated with, and yet we're called to still live faithfully here. Yeah. And part of that, a significant part of that, is letting as Colossians 1 says, set your mind on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So, taking your cues from him, not be conformed to this world, but by the renewing of your mind. Mm-hmm. Be transformed.
And the relationships we had over there, serving in adverse conditions in foreign environments alongside other brothers and sisters who have also dedicated themselves to a certain level.
There's a camaraderie
There is a camaraderie that is nearly impossible to replicate here in Canada.
Would you recommend missions to people who are listening to you? Would you recommend it? Do you think more people should consider it?
Yes and no. I think more people need to consider it. I don't necessarily think that everyone should be going. I think, and I'll make a plug for Northview and the missions focus that we're taking on. I think that people need to be sent, and not all people are to be sent. So I think everyone needs to be a part of missions. Everyone has a role. As by nature of being a Christian inside of a church, the church has been given a task. Not necessarily every individual has a part to play in that task, but the church has been given a task to see the gospel proclaimed around the world to all peoples. And we as a church need together to decide who gets sent, who goes where, how do we approach this task that we've been given, to do it well and to honor God and to glorify his name. And different people need to take different roles in that task, and not everyone's going to be the one that goes.
And everybody has a part to play.
Everyone has a part to play. Yeah.
It has been great talking to you, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time, your service here at the church. And I hope that you're able to fix lots of good helicopters that are going to save all of us from the fires.
Well, I'll do my best.
Thanks, buddy.
You're welcome.
Talk to you all later.